there's an election coming up for their leader on Sunday, and we'll know then. I mean, certainly if you look at the polling data, I had a brief look at it last evening, it would appear that Mr. Carney is ahead. And you know what, I think one of the things that Canadians want is just a bit of predictability now in this unstable world, to say, okay, well, you know, if first and foremost, let's settle this thing with the Liberal leadership, and then secondly, if there's going to be an election, let's have it. And, I think that's really what Canadians are looking forward to. Then they have their say. The uncertainty with respect to that, as you well know, there are many things that will remain uncertain, but the uncertainty with respect to that and the stability that having an elected majority government brings will be welcomed by many Canadians.
No, I appreciate that. My point really wasn't so much about, letting the Liberals decide their leader, but the fact of the matter is, you're right, the polls do suggest or indicate that Mark Carney might be the leader come Sunday. But you've actually put I'm saying you, it's your party I'm talking about, you've actually put your money where your mouth is, because all your ads are anti-Carney. Of course, you're still playing games with the what do you call it again? Carbon tax Carney and all that kind of crap. The thing that gets me is that your ads run him down to the lowest. They tie him into Europe. They tie him into the U.S. They tie him to Trump. And their ads about your leader tie him to Trump and run him down to the lowest. And, I watch both of those ads side by side, and I don't think I'd want to vote for either of those guys.
Well, I think the greatest part of it, Bill, and we've talked about this on the show before, but the greatest part about Canadian politics is you get to vote for your local representative. And I think for me, that's always exciting. As you know, my hat's in the ring to continue on as your member of parliament. And hopefully, the record will stand for itself. That, as I said, what I try to be is a person who's serious about the work that we do. We've met with hundreds of stakeholders as it relates to healthcare. And I guess I want to be clear to folks, even though healthcare is a provincial responsibility, the federal government does have that responsibility and the opportunity to show significant leadership on how we can change things as it pertains to healthcare. And, our idea around getting more practitioners into the system and evaluating folks who have obtained their medical degree and have experience in other countries, that's going to be incredibly important for Canadians. And, I had a meeting with the deans of the medical schools within the last couple of weeks, the 17 of them. And one of the things I said is for those 6.5 million Canadians who do not have a family doctor, even though we can talk about the greatness of our system, for those 6.5 million folks, the system doesn't even exist. It's very, very difficult for them to access it. And, the other thing that I challenged the deans of the medical schools with is to reduce the training time for Canadian medical graduates. To say, at Dalhousie, for instance, it takes now 4 years of medical school to graduate. I've challenged them to reduce that to 3 years. And I think in a time of crisis, as we have now in our healthcare system, where there's a lack of providers, we know that about 100,000 Nova Scotians don't have access to primary care, that it is incredibly important that all of the stakeholders act as if it's a crisis. And that's the challenge that I've portrayed to anybody who is a stakeholder inside the healthcare community. And if I'm fortunate enough to have an opportunity, then that's exactly the ideas that we'll bring forward from a federal healthcare perspective.
And of course, to put that into context, you are currently what they call the shadow cabinet minister for health in Canada. That is to say that, in theory, if the Conservatives were in power today, you'd be the Minister of Health. Now, we all both know that oftentimes people are given the responsibility to be the shadow cabinet minister before an election and before you have power. And then once you gain power, one can presuppose that that's because you've obviously increased your vote, increased your seat count, and increased the options for people to become the health minister. And sometimes the shadow cabinet minister in opposition doesn't get the office when they get to power. But that's a whole nother story, isn't it?
Well, as you suggest, Bill, I mean, the two are not necessarily related. But you know what? I would suggest, though, that the background work that I've done, it will form the basis of the platform that we'll be releasing. Certainly as soon as the writ is dropped, so people can see what in print what we have to say about healthcare. But as I said, it's been my responsibility to create those opportunities and those discussions with stakeholders, which I've very much enjoyed. And I think being a physician, it's made it a little bit easier, first of all, to have, much like any other small community of physician leaders, to have acceptance into that community, to understand very quickly what the issues are, to look at different options. Again, the challenge, though, that I've put to all of those so-called stakeholders is really related. Now is the time to stop talking and to make things happen. And for me, that's been one of the most frustrating things at the federal level, is to see, and again, as well as I do, I don't talk really partisan much on this show, and I don't believe that I should, but it's been very frustrating to see this Liberal government make many announcements but not do very much. And that's been incredibly frustrating. And that's one of the things, as I said, if I have an opportunity to influence that, then that is something that I would definitely want to see different, on the basis of the fact there's so many Canadians who are suffering due to the inefficiencies and lack of physicians, for example, and nurses in our healthcare system at the current time.
I appreciate all of that, certainly, and I made mention of the fact that you're shadow cabinet minister simply to point out that you've taken your skills as a physician, your knowledge as a physician, and put it to work for, as you say, coming up with policy for the next election campaign and perhaps beyond. But I didn't want anybody to think that should you get elected and you form government, that you will automatically have the position.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I was getting at, is that, you might look forward to it, and I certainly would look forward to it, but it may not happen, and that's just a fact of life. Looking at things where you think it's time to stop talking and start doing something, I've stopped the talking really about Donald Trump. And I've argued that we shouldn't even be talking to him anymore. In fact, all of these delegations, federal, provincial, and otherwise, that have gone south to try and deal with the question of heading off these ridiculous tariffs, they've all met with other people. Nobody got to talk to Trump himself, really. And when you talk to the other ones, they are... I'm looking for a word to describe it without getting very, very angry on the air. But you're wasting your breath to talk to them, because even when he had his cabinet together and he did the talking, anytime one of his cabinet spokesmen started to speak, he cut them off, or he contradicted them, or he told them that's enough. Clearly, the man does not pay any attention to anyone. Except possibly for Elon Musk. And of course, that cost him a few $1 million for the privilege. But aside from that, we've got a situation on our hands that we need to say, this is real. It's coming, and we don't know what's coming next, because he doesn't know what's coming next. He hasn't got a clue. And we need to go and map our own strategy, and we've been talking about that somewhat, breaking down the provincial barriers for interprovincial trade, looking at new markets for a possibility. I think in my editorial yesterday, I said it's time to close the border. Just forget about it. Just tell, okay. And this, by the way, he keeps saying that this tariff is on Canada. And in fact, a tariff is nothing more than a tax. And this, people need to understand, is an import tax, not an export tax. The tax is paid by the importer. So the tax is paid on the other side of the border in the United States by the people who buy the goods that come across the border. Of course, we're talking about putting a tariff on the goods that come our way, which means we're going to pay an import tax on that. And I think Canadians are rightly so upset right now that we're going to avoid buying American products as much as we can anyway. And that's the only way you can avoid the tax coming into Canada. But Trump's got people over there believing that you and your colleagues in Ottawa are writing checks and sending them over to him to pay for the tax. But when are the people going to realize this is coming out of their own pockets. And he's clearly trying to diminish us, weaken us, or even kill us to the point where he can simply take over us because he wants more important things than a little tax bill at the border.
You know, my only concern is, Bill, as you said, you weren't going to talk about him. Hey, listen, it's not a funny matter. You and I often like to joke back and forth, but this in particular is an existential threat to our way of life. And
Indeed.
Why is that? Because our economies historically, and there's lots of interesting speeches given by Ronald Reagan about tariffs, and as we know, these go back to the McKinley days as a thought from the United States. But that being said, you know, our economies over the last at least half a century for certain have become incredibly integrated, such that almost 3/4 of things that we make here and export go to the United States. The United States is an incredible consumer of goods, and therefore it's created a ready market for Canada. The difficulty, of course, is that we have become less self-reliant than what we possibly could be, and that's a detriment. That doesn't mean that can't change. That's just the state of affairs that exists at the current time. The other difficulty, of course, is that the financial picture for most Canadians is still very, very difficult. All of those things that we spoke about previously, about cost of living, about housing, all of those issues about crime will remain, and they are still there. And they still need to be dealt with. And the difficulty, of course, is the Liberal government has had 9 years to fix those things, and that has put us in a very weak position in terms of our own economy and how Canadians feel about the future. And I do feel very strongly that I had an opportunity as a young person for my life to be different simply because I was born in Canada. I had great opportunities. I was willing to work hard. That's the promise that we aim to restore to all Canadians, to say that, yes, you have an opportunity here that you can have a good paying job with a paycheck, with a retirement that's dignified, to be able to live in a house in a safe neighborhood. And we can't forget those things, even though, as you said, our ability to change Donald Trump is almost zero. We can't forget the things that we can change. And those things that existed before Donald Trump came with his bluster onto the world stage still remain in this country. And those are things that we must change and that we will change as the Conservative Party as an election begins.
And of course, the Canadian people, we're resourceful, we're resilient, we're tough, and we're proud. There's no question about that. I'm not making a speech, but that's just who we are. And when we're challenged, when we're faced with difficulty, we're prepared to stand up and fight for it. And we'll take it in the chin a couple of times, but we've given back. We punched above our weight class for years and years and years. Our involvement in World War I and World War II, in the many skirmishes and wars and battles across the world ever since World War II. Canadians have stood tall and stood proud and stood their ground. And we'll do it again. We really will. But this, I think, is an opportunity for us to say, you know what? We don't really need the United States. Yeah, we send an awful lot of stuff there, but that's in a handful of companies. Some of those companies have cross-border ownership as well. When you think of the auto industry and how that's intertwined, no question about it. But, you know, a lot of the profits from that in Canada go to the United States as well. And, maybe we can stand up now and say, it's time. We talked with Tori Rushton yesterday about the effort to find some rare minerals and some newly valuable minerals that are used, and lithium being a good example, a prime resource used in the ever-growing demand for rechargeable batteries and usable batteries. And we've got a bunch of it. And what was striking in the conversation was, in the old days, we would mine it and send it down to the United States where they would develop it into a product. This time, we're looking at developing the product as well, right here. I mean, it goes back to all the gypsum we shipped to the States, and then we bought back the gyprock. Why didn't we make the gyprock? This time we've got a chance to do that.
All those things are great questions, and I think that the important thing is, though, that with respect to mining minerals and petrochemicals, all of those things, that we also have to remember that we have these incredible natural resources here in our great province related to our fantastic historical industries of fishing and farming and forestry. The other industries, though, that Minister Rushton is talking about developing, we have to ensure from a federal and provincial point of view that we are not getting in the way of those approvals to use those natural resources which we have been blessed with. I had an opportunity to speak to a lawyer who I just ran into him at the airport, and I think I told this story previously on the show, but a copper mine permit in Canada took 20 years to gain. Bill, as you well know, we do not have 20 years to wait for a permit to bring lithium out of the ground. And those are things that, again, a majority conservative government would change as well. We need to do things in a safe and environmentally friendly manner, but we can't be hamstrung by the inability to use, as I said before, those incredible natural resources which we have been blessed with. And I know that again, it sounds incredibly partisan, but this is what's happened over the last 9 years, that we have not been able to access those things. 20 years for a permit to build a mine for copper, that's unacceptable. So if those things do not change, and I'll guarantee you with a conservative majority federal government, those things would change, and that is exactly how to improve the financial fortunes, not just of Nova Scotia, but we see these examples all across the great country of Canada.
It's all about doing our own thing, doing what's right, and doing it safely.
And doing it well. We have a great history of that. We can do things here. Sadly, again, that promise to Canadians has been broken, that we have been battered down over the last 9 years, and things have not been happening. And we're now $1.3 trillion in debt. The cost to service the debt is $1 billion a week.
Ouch.
Billion. Which is it's more than the national defense budget, and it is almost exactly the same amount as the Canada Health Transfer.
And I haven't got 10 cents. Every time you tell me what it cost us in interest payments, I ouch is all I can think of.
You know what? I hate to be that. There was that TV show, a character called Debbie Downer. I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but we do find it is incumbent upon us to remind folks of how we got to the place where we are, which then means we need a change from a federal government that has been the do-no, the can't-da government, as Tim Houston said, putting the no in Nova Scotia. Those things must change. We must be Canada first, and we, as the Canada's Conservatives, will do that.